Welcome back to the Michigan Business Beat, brought to you on the Michigan Business Network. And as you can see, we are in the garden level of the Holman House, Studio B. On our way, by the way, very soon to our new digs out at the airport, the Capital Region International Airport, which is where we'll be broadcasting for the next several years. But right now we're going to run down to Ann Arbor, and Chuck Warpehoski is going to join us. He is the program director at Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Chuck, thanks so much for joining us. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks to be with you, John.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about what's going on, and especially around Veterans Day. I think legislation helping incarcerated veterans.
Absolutely. So, as you know, Veterans Day, it's about making sure that the people who have served our country, the men and women who have served our country, have the support they need. And sometimes, unfortunately, their service leaves them with injuries, sometimes physical injuries, sometimes psychological injuries like PTSD. And we've seen it. We all know the stories of sometimes that leaves them to make poor choices when they come home, and sometimes they end up incarcerated. And absolutely, there needs to be accountability for actions. But we also need to be able to look and say, does the sentence serve the crime? And sometimes they end up being too long. So what we're proposing with second look legislation is to be able to say, okay, let's take a look at somebody who's serving a long sentence and they've already been in 10 to 15 years. Are they safe to come home? And if they are, let's maybe adjust that minimum sentence so then they can see the parole board and to be evaluated to see if it'd be safe for them to come back home and get the support they need in community rather than in a prison.
You know, it's kind of interesting because we have a young man in the mid-Michigan area right now that has really lobbied to have stickers put on people who maybe have Asperger's or something like that, so that when the police pull them over, they know what they might be confronting. Is that something that might ward off some of this incarceration?
It is really important that our emergency responders, whether they're law enforcement or EMTs or whoever, are sensitive to whatever they may come up with. Because a lot of the emergency calls people get, it may be scary, it may be uncomfortable, but it may not be dangerous. And especially if somebody has mental illness, they're neurodiverse, or they have PTSD or substance abuse issues, you need to be sensitive to that on the front end because you can avoid escalating things if you're trained for that. And knowing helps. I'm always nervous about broadcasting for somebody their condition rather than letting them choose to disclose, but making sure our first responders are ready to respond, and also that there's options, right? If somebody's having a mental health episode, maybe it's not always a cop who needs to respond. Maybe we need other responders who can go in, deal with them as mental health professionals, help them get the care they need, rather than a police officer who's trained to deal with a lot of things, but it means that they don't always have the depth of training to deal with something like that, where there may be neurodiversity or mental illness at play.
So you suggested offering them a second look. What exactly do you propose?
So second look legislation would be that somebody who's served a long sentence, after they've been in for 10 or 15 years, they would be able to go back to their sentencing judge and petition for resentencing. That we'd be able to look at things like their history of trauma, right? Like, how have they done after they've been incarcerated? Are there other conditions that may have factored in? And that gives the sentencing judge the chance to say, you know what, maybe the minimum sentence here was too long and we were keeping them away from the parole board for too long. And if that's the case, let's adjust that minimum sentence. That doesn't get them out of prison. It just means that they're able to see the parole board and say, okay, are they safe to come home?
Yeah. So also you'd have to make accommodation for the fact that the judge might not be there anymore, or he might not be available, et cetera. So you're just saying go before someone who can review.
At the court that gave you your initial sentence. So there's still that community accountability. It's not venue shopping. Hey, we've got a really lax judge over, I'm in Ann Arbor, so that's going to be the stereotype, right? It's not going to be go to a lax judge. It's got to be go to the community where the offense occurred, go to that court, and they're the ones who'd be looking at your file to see if you get resentenced. So
tell me about the safety of this.
One of the things we find is that people who've done long sentences, their recidivism rate is about the same rate as the crime committing rate for people who don't have a criminal record. So it is very safe, and especially the people who've served long time. They're also going before the parole board. So there's multiple checks to make sure that the people who come home are safe. So this is something that when we look at the data, when we look at the stories, we believe we can absolutely keep our community safe. And you know what? You mentioned that response to somebody who's got Asperger's. Incarceration is really expensive. We take that money, we're putting it on incarcerating somebody who'd be safe to come home, and we put that into better upfront treatment, better upfront detection, more sophisticated response to somebody's in mental health crisis. That frees up money to help us prevent crimes, not just respond after the fact.
Chuck, we got about probably 45 seconds left here. We have a duty to look after our veterans, but are there other reasons that we should be doing it?
You know, there are other situations where this kind of second look comes in place. I was just looking at a case of a woman who was attacked, stabbed, and raped by her ex-husband while she was pregnant. And she fought back and she killed her ex-husband in the process, and she's serving a life sentence, right? She would be safe to come home to community. Her child, who ended up being born prematurely, was raised without her mom, right? These are the kinds of cases where the first time the sentencing took place, it got wrong. We should have a chance to second look and come back.
Well, Chuck Warpehoski, the program director at Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration. Keep up the good work, my friend. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You've been watching this Michigan Business Beat on the Michigan Business Network. I'm Chris Holman. We'll be back with you.